It only rains twice in the Grapes of Wrath, once at the very beginning, and once at the very end. Steinbeck opens that novel by writing, quote, "To the red country and part of the gray country of Oklahoma, the last rains came gently, and they did not cut the scarred earth. The plows crossed and recrossed the rivulet marks. The last rains lifted the corn quickly and scattered weed colonies and grass along the sides of the roads so that the gray country and the dark red country began to disappear under a green cover. In the last part of May, the sky grew pale, and the clouds that had hung in high puffs for so long in the spring were dissipated. The sun flared down on the growing corn, day after day, until a line of brown spread along the edge of each green bayonet. The clouds appeared, and went away, and in a while they did not try any more. The weeds grew darker green to protect themselves, and they did not spread any more. The surface of the earth crusted, a thin, hard crust, and as the sky became pale, so the earth became pale, pink in the red country, and white in the gray country." End quote. He goes on, and on, as only Steinbeck does, about the worsening drought and its consequences, setting the stage for the exodus of people who have no choice but to leave, to look for some place, any place where they can find a way to feed themselves. The first thing Jusant does is inform us of its title's meaning. It is a French word for a receding tide, but the water has not just receded, it is completely gone along with the people who depended on it. For all we know, the player character is the last person left alive on this planet, and it is left to them to pick through the lore entries and detritus that, in the absence of dialogue, tell their own story of desperation and societal collapse. Even in such heavily and beautifully stylized environments, details assure us of the reality of this world and put us in the role of detectives or archaeologists. Whoever lived here had sawmills, presumably supplied only by driftwood. They had a square, banjo-like instrument with which they played live music in their restaurants. They even appear to have had some kind of toilet. Their children played with stuffed animals and toy boats. They used hand plows and rakes to tend these terraced gardens, and they had jugs, and barrels, and tanks, and wells, and fountains, and boats, and docks, and canal locks, and all sorts of other things for handling, traversing, and otherwise interacting with water. Whether these people know the origins or not, their writings are full of idioms and metaphors that reflect the seafaring society of their grandparents. While exploring a gigantic cavern inside of the tower, we find a mural depicting how it once served as an elevated aquifer for those who lived on the cliffsides, irrigating their terraced crops. We are deluged with a torrent of evidence for the erstwhile presence of water, but we never see a single drop. The intriguing thing about the player character is that they are clearly not from the flatlands of the desert. They arrive at the tower already in possession of the skills and equipment needed to climb it. There will be no further upgrades to either, nor are any upgrades needed. Jusant easily has the best and coolest version of video game climbing that I've interacted with. The left stick is used to search for specific handholds with your free hand. Once you find one, you can grab it with the trigger that corresponds to that hand, and then let go of the other trigger. If you let go of both triggers at the same time, you will fall. A checkpoint system naturally emerges out of the use of pitons and rope, and pitons can be strategically placed to allow you to swing or wall run over to other handholds. Jusant is a video game, so there are some supernatural elements that add to these environmental puzzles, some of which work better than others. It would be easy for these systems to feel clunky or frustrating, but because the climbing is the central feature of Jusant, it has been very well polished. The player character's movement from handhold to handhold feels fluid, tactile, and responsive. The traversal of these cliff faces is laborious, but the systems are so solidly built and the environments are so beautiful to explore that it becomes a labor of love. And the genuine effort it takes to climb means it is genuinely rewarding to get to the top of a cliff and reel in your rope. A game like Uncharted would benefit greatly from this type of approach, from traversal that is less cinematic and more meaningfully arduous. That sort of investment would make it far more fulfilling to finally rappel down into the cavern that holds the answers to your mysteries. When it comes to movement on level ground, however, Jusant still has some rough edges. There are all sorts of problems with terrain geometry, and the transitions between walking and climbing are always a bit weird. But the climbing, as I've said, is the main feature, and that at least is immaculate. You can often see where you came from and where you're headed, but Jusant's environments are not contiguous. They are broken up into individual levels separated by immersion-breaking cutscenes. I don't want to make a huge deal out of this because it's an indie game and I'm sure there are technical limitations, but it is worth mentioning that traversing these environments would have felt more like the long, arduous, precarious journey it is supposed to be if I had to take every step and find every handhold myself, instead of having the cutscene shuttle bus pick me up and then drop me off at the next attraction. This jump, in particular, would have meant a lot more if it was a decision that I had to come to terms with, if it was something I did instead of something that happened to me. Some of the lore entries mention the fact that the sun has stopped moving, and that would seem to be the case. The tower has a permanently scorching sunny side and a permanently enshrouded shady side. Clearly, this planet has become tidally locked to its sun, and that sort of event would cause all sorts of problems, including the drastic fall and, apparently at one time in the past, rise of the waters. Even disregarding the tidal forces, many oceans would just dry up under permanent sunlight. The Mediterranean, for example, mostly dried up when it was disconnected from the Atlantic between 5 and 6 million years ago. Jusant's world, then, does not need to resort to supernatural elements in order to explain itself, but it does nevertheless. There's nothing wrong with that, though, because it is quite fun to befriend some sky whales and blow the horn of Helm Hammerhand one last time. It is this action which finally brings back the rain. Quote, "The rain began with gusty showers, pauses, and downpours, and then gradually it settled to a single tempo, small drops and a steady beat. Rain that was gray to see through, rain that cut midday light to evening. And at first the dry earth sucked the moisture down and blackened. For 2 days the earth drank the rain, until the earth was full. Then puddles formed, and in the low places little lakes formed in the fields. The muddy lakes rose higher, and the steady rain whipped the shining water. At last the mountains were full, and the hillsides spilled into the streams, built them to freshets, and sent them roaring down the canyons into the valleys. The rain beat on steadily." End quote.